Well, good morning, Michael. It's my great pleasure to have you as a guest on the See You Next podcast. I've been looking forward to this for weeks now. I think it's a topic that we're going to provide some good insights to the viewers. But before we get started, why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about you personally, professionally, and your background?
Sure, Joe. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm happy to talk to your audience. Yeah, Joe and I were talking, before we started, and we've both been in this industry for quite a long time. I'm retired from U.S. Bank as Senior Vice President for Consumer Technology right before the pandemic. And, my whole career I had been doing technology from a business perspective. So, I grew up mostly in the business side to begin with and moved to technology in 1980. So it's a long time in technology, but I always had the perspective on the business side and how you use technology to deliver the business benefits. And I very quickly moved into kind of project management and then system management and then executive management. One of the things that I did in my career, I wound up writing 3 books, okay, and it's interesting to watch my career through the 3 books. The first one came about when I was at Wells Fargo and we were doing a $1 billion project that completely failed called CORE. It's kind of infamous in the industry.
CORE, core, right?
CORE, common something or other.
Common origination for
That
something.
common originations, I forget what else.
Yeah.
And it was run as a very rigid waterfall, tight control, detailed estimates, very segmented departmentally and functionally. And while that was going on, my group had already converted to kind of an early form of Agile. Okay. And so we had a lot of conflict about methodology and approach. And at the end of it, when it failed, I had to fire my whole team. Kind of as a catharsis, I wrote a book, okay, trying to explain to business leaders what Lean and Agile was all about. Because this was a great company, smart people, good ideas, total failure, right? And it was because we just went about it the wrong way, in a way that was very unlikely to succeed. So that was my first book, and it was basically what is Lean and Agile about. Okay, so it was a tale of 2 systems. It was kind of a novel approach, which I kind of liked. And then after that, I moved to running the mortgage technology, okay, through the crisis, the 2008, 2011 or 12 mortgage crisis. Kind of unlimited budgets, total amount of work, etc. And there, my challenge was, how do I take an organization that was growing very rapidly, right, and had all kinds of different methodologies and lots of vendors, and how do I make that run better? Okay, and the shortcut is how do I make it more agile, right, or lean? And when I was with that, I wrote a book about how to take an organization that's not agile and make it agile, right? And a couple of different approaches there: blow it up and start over. Okay, sometimes you do that, and how to incrementally change, and how do you use people through that. Then the next and the last kind of chapter of my career is when I went to U.S. Bank, which was I was at for my last 10 years. Another great company. I had the privilege of working at really good companies. And U.S. Bank, when I got there, was extraordinarily rigid and tightly controlled and waterfally. And over time, they gradually changed, and then they rapidly embraced Agile. Okay, consultant-driven, big investments. It turned out really quite well. The thing that got me, though, was it was so focused on methodology. Right, that Agile as a methodology, right, and I found it completely stifling, and it failed to deliver in many ways because of that. I mean, it was improvements, and it was good, and it made U.S. Bank a much better organization and a better place to work. But they missed the whole point of people over process, which is the first Agile principle in the manifesto. And so that was the 3rd book I wrote. So I turned it into a trilogy. The last book is called People Over Process. And it's really about the role of people. And I think that as you age, you'll probably, I don't know if you have a similar experience, but as you age, I think you start to appreciate more the people who are involved in things. It's not so much figuring things out, especially, I'm kind of analytical and like to figure puzzles out. And then the people side of it is always harder, right?
Yeah.
But I think I realized over time that the people side of it is the most important thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my old boss used to say our challenges or our opportunities are 2/3 people, 1/3 process and technology.
I think that's right. I mean, I really can't think of many technology failures in my career, and this goes back to 80, right? The failures are mostly leadership and people and organizational structures.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great that you're an author and you've got a trilogy so people can check that out. But tell us a little bit about you personally.
I mean, I grew up in northern Minnesota, went to college at Carleton and Princeton, did international economics for 3 years in
Oh,
Washington,
wow.
D.C. We had a baby and wanted to move back to Minnesota. I kind of stumbled into banking, became a banker. So I was actually in international banking and then in lending for 3 years. It was a great experience, but it wasn't what I wanted to do really. And then
Hmm.
there I got into technology.
Yeah.
So,
But then, and now you, now when we were working together, I could always tell. Sometimes you were dressed up in your woolly clothes,
oh
and then
yeah.
sometimes you were dressed in your Hawaiian shirts.
Yeah,
Two different.
we love Hawaii. We spend, a couple months a year there now since I'm mostly retired. But obviously I'm in Minnesota now in my
Yeah,
Willie.
yeah. So you don't like minus 20 degrees and ice fishing, I
Not
guess.
so much. I know you do.
That's because of the movie Grumpy Old Men. Was one of my favorite movies. So, well, listen, no, thank you for sharing all that about you and your background. And so, you and I, when you add up all the technology projects we've done, it probably literally is in the billions, right? We've been above, below, around, in, of technology projects. And we've been in the business a long time and we've seen a lot of methodologies come and go, right? I
Right.
did some research the other night trying to get them in chronological order, but, people might remember SSADM, then we had RAD, we had V model, we had RUP, we had CMM, and then of course Agile and its flavors, Scrum, Kanban, XP, and of course scaled Agile for the enterprise safe. And it's interesting when you look back as a career, each methodology tried to solve the problem of the prior, which was we really weren't delivering technology value the way we thought we would, right? And kind of everyone, it is almost like we got, to your point, we got process over people, right? Not people over process. And so, these methodologies got misapplied and, as a substitute for experience and architecture and leadership. And so when you started helping me at Penn, I realized, we could get agility and agile mixed up, right? IT people think if the business says agility, the IT guys, oh great, we'll go do agile, right? And that's how we'll get business agility. And it's not that simple. And you introduced me to a concept and a book. It was team topologies, right? And you explained to me, and I'll hand back to you here in a minute, but you explained to me one of the key elements that's missing in Agile is the role of management and leadership. And that immediately resonated with me. And I thought, well, if we're going to do some Agile development here, we can fail pretty easily. We'll probably fail more easier than we'll succeed.
Right.
But that thinking that you brought really impacted me hugely for the next 10 years as I progressed as CIO. So talk to us about that notion of team topologies and
Love to. It's interesting. When I was young in the industry, my first exposure to methodology was Method One, which was the Accenture methodology.
ah
And I loved it. I learned so much that way. So I don't want to leave the impression that methodologies aren't valuable. I mean, they're really codification of a lot of good things. Okay, so I think they're really fundamental, and there's so much to learn from them, right? Okay, so, but what on the leadership side is how you apply them and how your teams work and how your organization is structured. And when I wrote my book, People Over Process, I had this idea of, silos, right? Okay, so we always talk about organizational silos and how bad they are. Okay, and I don't know if you remember Jack Walsh, if you're old enough to do that from GE. He had this saying of break down all the silos. Okay, and I've come to believe that that's just lunacy, right? The issue is how do you build the right silos, okay? And then how do you connect those silos together and lead those silos? Okay, so I called it Silos and Bridges in my book, and this is before team topologies. So the idea was that people only have so much capacity to think, okay, and only so much capacity to kind of coordinate across teams. And different teams have different goals and objectives, and they're not aligned all the time. It's so much work to make things happen and to learn new things. And our minds are so full already of all the work we have to do of just what we're trying to accomplish, which is complicated and difficult and new all the time. Right? So this idea of building the right silos and the right bridges was kind of core to how I think about organizational structures. And I don't know, with your experience, we both came from big companies, and how many times in a big company you're trying to get something done, and someone says, "Oh no, you want to buy this software that's based on SQL Server, but our standard is Oracle. You can't use it." right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
you want to do an integration, and it's easy you could do it in a day or so, but you have to use this other department to do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's in the way of what we would call business agility, of getting things done by having to rely on others. So the Team Topologies idea is a really good book I'd recommend to people. It just took it one step further and it kind of described the types of teams, that there's different kinds of teams, okay, and there's different kinds of relationships between the teams.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we talked about this with your group, right, in terms
Yeah.
of the primary team is called the stream delivery team.
Yeah. Hey, Michael, just before I'll come right back to that. I want to foot stomp a point you made, which is really important. The silos, right? Yeah, I remember Jack Welch and Michael Hammer and all these guys, right? The pros. But you're right, because vertical silos, then we break them down, but then we had horizontal silos, and you can't avoid, right? To your point, it's how do you make the right silos and how do you interoperate effectively, right? And of course, you're going to describe that now in a minute with the streamlined and everything. But the other concept that I think you're going to talk about, and I just want to make sure the viewers are listening for your insights on this, was when I look back on all these projects that I've done, technology projects, this cognitive, the book calls it the cognitive overload on the teams is immense. It's immense. We put this huge, thinking burden and say, go agile and just deliver quickly, right? And that was another big insight you gave. And so this thinking through how do you break that down is important. So I just wanted the listeners to kind of listen for your insight around that as well. But anyway, back to your teams and the streamline.
Right. I mean, this is the topic. This cognitive overload is really an important one. And I'll just give one more good example your listeners might enjoy. Because I know the credit union people, they're kind of familiar with kind of mortgages, right? And when we were deciding a U.S. bank, we had a retail origination system, right? And we wanted to improve our correspondent origination. And the retail system could have been enhanced, right? It had capabilities to do some of correspondent. But the head of the business and I, as we talked it over, we decided that it's better to have a different system. Okay? Now, technologically, you could share, absolutely, right? Would it be lower cost from a technology perspective? Sure, right? But what it would mean internally is our correspondent department and our retail department would have to collaborate on priorities, on who manages the vendor, on how you do integrations, on all kinds of things that would just slow everything down, right? So from a technology perspective, what was the right decision? Share a system. From a business perspective, do not share a system, right? Kind of freaks people out when I tell them that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If we go back to kind of the silos, the Team Topology book had the stream aligned as the most important. And what that really means is, if you think about the example I just gave, one stream would be retail mortgage origination, another would be correspondent origination. But within there's going to be other streams, right? Within retail, there might be, the customer-facing piece. Okay, there might be the actual retail loan officer facing piece. There might be the compliance piece. There might be the pricing piece, right? And the idea is you try to make it so each stream can deliver as with as little interaction with other people as possible, okay? So technologically, you try to divide things up. You try to make things independent as much as you can, and management-wise as well. And then you have to build teams that are combined, kind of what we call business and technical.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen teams put together where you have a vendor involved, but the vendor's not on the team, right? The vendor's managed by vendor management. You go, what? Right? That makes no sense. So building those streamlined teams is core, and then how you manage those teams is also critical. Ideally, you'd like to have one manager for the whole team. That doesn't work very well because of the expertise required, right? Yeah. Control required. So oftentimes you'll have a business leader on a team who reports up to a business chain, right, who have P&L responsibility. And then you'll have a technology leader on the team who reports into the technology group, who's more focused on things like performance and architecture and safety, right, and then the actual delivery of the software. Mm-hmm. So that streamlined team then has friends, right?
Right, but just real quick, another big point you just made, I want to make sure we pull it out, was this streamlined team to be self-sufficient to deliver, right? That's the flow of value. How do you get value quickly? But a combined team, right? Not business and technology and supplier, but a combined team, right?
Yep.
And we did that at Penn. And that insight that you brought to us really did. So we had streamlined teams around consumer banking. We had streamlined teams around mortgage. We had streamlined teams around operations and call center. And that part worked. There's some other components you've got to have with it, but that's an extremely important one. So anyway, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The leadership is really critical, right? How you manage it.
Yeah, yeah.
So then you have these streamlined teams have friends, right, in other streams that are related to each other. Okay? And then there's a couple of special kinds of teams that Team Topologies pointed out. Okay, one was the platform team, right?
Mm-hmm.
For you in your organization, it was pretty clear, right, where you had a platform that you were using for lots of things, right? In your case, I think it was Salesforce. But other people might have, the Amazon cloud, or we all love Java, or we're a Microsoft shop, whatever it might be, right? That platform that is shared across groups needs to be supported, right? And the idea is you have a team to support the platform.
Mm-hmm.
You separate very clearly supporting the platform from supporting the business, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all of this assumes a certain scale. Right. So if you have a very small credit union with, mostly vendor-oriented with 10 technology people, this isn't going to work all that well. Your vendor might be organized this way, but it's going to be hard for you to do that. Okay. So you have to consider scale and investment when you're doing this. And, I've just had my experience was mostly in pretty big companies where the problem was too much technology going on. It's never not enough.
Yeah, yes. But, on the point of platform, it's really important because I think in this team topology concept, it embraces something called Conway's law, right? You probably know this better than me. Of course, my career up until I met you was all using Murphy's law, which didn't work out. Which didn't work out so well.
Right.
But Conway's law is really important. It says organizations, are designed around the communication structure and the architecture that you want to deliver, right? And so when I saw what you had given us about the platform teams and the streamlined teams, that matched exactly with the reference architecture. And I thought, well, that makes sense. That's how we should be organized, right? Because if we didn't organize that way and had a good architecture, we would never have delivered, or vice versa. Right? If we tried to set the teams up that way, but there was no architecture, they wouldn't be able to deliver.
Correct.
Right? It was a huge part of it was, organizing to deliver the architecture and based on the communication needs of these different silos, right? Back to your point about the right silos working together the right way.
Yeah. And, I think that's one thing I think that you did so well, right, is that you had this idea of a platform that we're going to share, right? Because you don't want to have a dozen platforms because you can't afford it, right? And it's just too hard. So a dominant platform is really valuable. And then the role of the leader here, it goes back to kind of what's the role of management and agility, okay? So what do leaders do? Leaders help set the overall architecture. Leaders set the team structure. And then the next piece is leaders help influence the communication between the teams. So you have the platform team and you have your streamline team. And the question is, how do they talk with each other, right? How do they get things done together? And there's a couple of ways, right? One is what's called the API, right? Okay, which is basically you publish a way of interacting with me and just you go do it on your own to the extent you can. That's ideal in many situations. The problem is things change so much and things are so complicated. You need humans to help with that, right? In my experience, especially where you're interacting with a team that's deep, right? Where the Salesforce platform, it's enormous, right? So you want to figure that out. You kind of need someone who knows Salesforce, right? You can't just kind of look at the book or, that doesn't work too well. So, but to the extent that you can, you want to do that. So platform teams will publish APIs, they'll do training, etc., but they need to have humans. And a human interaction is called facilitation in this kind of an instance, right? Where a human from one team helps another team work effectively with them. Facilitation of all kinds of things. The other kind of team that's kind of like a platform is what's called a complicated subsystem.
Oh yes, the complex subsystem.
And banking, for me, it was always Hogan, right? Which was the customer information
system. Us too, yeah, Hogan.
Big mainframe system, really complicated, right? Yeah. You can't muck around with it too much. So it winds up being a team that manages anything that goes in Hogan. So if you want something in Hogan, you never can do it yourself, right? You just got to call these guys and get on their list, right? It's a constraint you have. You got to deal with it, right? Okay, and it works great over time, and that interaction is valuable. So those are kind of the three primary kinds of teams: a streamlined, a platform, and a complicated subsystem.
Yeah, can I just maybe summarize, because you covered a lot of ground there, but using the Penfed case study, we had the platform team, right, which was around Salesforce, and we built the APIs, and we built the reusable components, and we built some of the tougher stuff. Then the streamlined teams had the kind of combined business technology, and it was kind of more of a federated IT. And because the business can do a lot with Salesforce, right? If you govern it right, because it is a low code approach. So we had these streamlined teams, and then we had the platform team, and then we had behind them, shielded from them, the complex subsystems. So Hogan was one. Of course, you had Black Knight was another. You had FICO or, whatever your consumer origination. And it worked really well. The one thing I wanted to go back to when you were talking about the roles of leadership, one other thing that I think I found very important to do at Penn was as a leader, was to reduce the cognitive load on the teams. Make it easy for them to succeed. You know the old saying, any fool can make something complicated. It takes a real genius to make it simple, right? Not simplistic, but simple, right? And I think that leadership, I always used to spend a lot of time with my peers, in mortgage, in consumer, in operations, having this conversation where we could say, how do we reduce the cognitive load on the team, the Agile, the streamlined team, so that they could deliver value quickly? And that's where the 80 thinking came in a lot of the times. But it was a very important part, because without those team structures set up in the way that you described, with the facilitation happening, I don't think we could have achieved half of what we achieved at Penn. Literally, even this day, I look back and I go, wow, it was pretty amazing that we could do this. That old saying, the harder you work, the luckier you get. Yeah, man, we did a lot of hard work in those early days to set it up. But anyway, so it's amazing that the team topologies, my team always used to get mad at me because I used to say, oh, Agile, yeah, the FR is silent, because they used to. But seriously, though, that Agile manifesto, it's 20 years old now or plus, it's pretty old, had a gaping hole, right, that you identified, that the book Team Topologies held. And it is the role of management and leadership, and it's key.
Did not address this at all, right? So, and this is a core of my third book, which is, what is the role of management? And I think there's three. Okay, now you can make your own models, right? Okay, so these aren't the only three you could do, but I like these three. Okay, one is rigor, right? So management or leadership has a responsibility to build rigor into their organization. That we expect rigor, we expect facts, we expect open discussion, we expect decisions made upon facts. Okay, now that's huge. Okay, it's an enormous thing. The next one is efficiency, and efficiency is not just low cost, right? It's that you get things done well, right? Okay, so it's to make sure that you take out wasteful overhead, you make it as easy for people to interact as you can, as you talked about. You don't have too many meaningless meetings. You don't have too much, burden on people. So that's key. And your organizations can become inefficient really easily, right? As all kinds of things get added on. How do you cut through all that and make it efficient? And then the last one, when I was taught this, it was called having fingerprints, and I called it alignment. Okay, so that is that you have a lot of smart people who have a lot of different knowledge and a lot of different beliefs and a lot of different values, right? And you want people to feel like they're listened to and they're valuable, and that diversity of thought and opinion and experience is really valuable. Okay, so how do you get a robust discussion and dialogue and debate? Right? But at the end of the day, on each particular issue, when you need to move forward, people feel they've been involved and feel a good decision has been made, and they're moving forward towards a common place.
Yeah, on that last point, Michael, in the credit unions, in the credit union movement, I always found when we had those alignment challenges, right? Because to your point, everyone's got good ideas. Bright people have good ideas. You leave your ego at the door and you stay laser focused on the member, right? And then when you do that, then the alignment discussion becomes very productive. It doesn't become very tense, right? It becomes very productive, and actually you end up building on each other's talents and experience, and you come up with a great solution. That's what I love about credit unions, right? Because it has a real focus on the members. Not to say that banks don't, but sometimes the shareholders can get in the way.
Yeah.
Sometimes the shareholders can get in the way, or the incentive systems can get in the way. But I do think that point you made about alignment, of the 3 points you made, I think the alignment point is the best. And a lot of times, technology projects fail because we're not aligned, right? Yeah. And we want to, we IT want to deliver what we think's right. I was talking about this with Ricky Burks the other day, another podcast that we did. But I asked, why do we fail? Why do technology projects fail so much? Or why do we have the reputation, in the industry or the business? He told me because we become purists, right? Technologists become purists. And to your point earlier, you could be a purist and say, well, we should have one system for correspondent and retail, but that might be the purist technology decision, but that's not the right business decision, right?
Right. And the other thing about alignment is there's an example that still sticks in my craw of a real big project where the business wanted to do requirements for the project. Okay. And they didn't want to be constrained by technology. We don't want technology. We want to think this from the scratch, etc. And there already was a system, right? They'd already chosen a system that they were going to implement. They didn't want to be constrained by the system. So they wind up doing months worth with a consultant of detailed requirements, right? And the basic way they approached it was just at odds with the way the system worked, right? Okay. I mean, and it was a little thing, it was like, the idea is that when you're in a sales conversation in a bank branch, right, and you're a new customer, we're going through everything, and am I going through all of your needs and setting up all your projects, and at the end kind of printing it up and finishing off and signing, or do I do each one? Okay. Now, do customers care? I don't think so, right? But it was a huge thing, and people just got like this, right? And it was because one group thought their job was to come up with requirements, and one group thought their job was to deliver the technology, right? And they were two different groups, right?
Yeah.
Management did not do a strong enough job at the beginning to put these together, because that culture of being aligned, thinking about delivery, right? And the whole delivery is too hard, right? Yeah. It's hard. Technology people, some of these technology people, they didn't want to work with the business. They said, just give me your requirements and I'll deliver it.
Yeah.
Right?
It's interesting. It's interesting you say that, about constraints. Like, nobody wants constraints, or, I don't want, resource constraints, or this constraint, or the technology, whatever. But that's life. That's reality. And I always felt, hey, you should embrace the constraints, right? That old saying that, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So you should embrace the constraints and then just apply, try and use that to be inventive or creative or think through it. But, it was like Hogan. Remember, you probably heard this. Oh, Hogan is a constraint. Well, there's a lot of things smart people can do with Hogan that makes it not a constraint, right? But I do think if you look back on our careers, I know we're running out of time here, Michael, but if you go back over our careers, I think you and I ended up in the same place, right? 2/3 people, 1/3 process and technology. And so easy for both business and technology to rely on process and technology, right? The business wants to rely on maybe process, and the IT guys want to focus on the technology, or both. And it's really a people issue, right?
Right. And it's not, one of the things I talk about as a leadership responsibility and under the efficiency thing is, leaders have to fire bad people, right? Okay. So the quality of the people and the skills of the people, that's all important part of the role, right? The hardest part of the role is taking all these smart people who all want to do the right thing, okay, who know a lot, and getting them all aligned around something that's so complicated now, right? Because the technology is complicated. The technology is always new. When have you ever done a big project that was using the same technology you used for the last project, right? Never. So you're always learning new things. So how do you take this complicated endeavor to make complicated technology that's always new with all these different people? How do you make that conglomerate of people actually deliver things and be happy?
Yeah.
That, to me, that's the challenge of technology leadership.
It is. And I do thank you, because, when I started at Penn, if you had not brought that thinking and insight to me, I would not have gone down a different path and probably been much less successful. I think the way we set up the organization to deliver the reference architecture, to give agility, not agile, to give agility, right? Because again, I don't think there's any substitute for judgment, experience, architecture, and leadership. So it was great. And so I thoroughly enjoyed the chat, Michael, and I appreciate you joining us from the chilly Minnesota. And hopefully you get to head to Hawaii here in the near.
I wanted to add just one thing for your credit union listeners. I know they're from small credit unions to bigger credit unions, right? And a lot of leadership people, management people, I think, are probably your listeners. And I would say, think mostly about how do you get your people to work together in a positive way. Eliminate the idea of, are you in the business or are you in technology? I know they're going to be in different organizations. But how do you make them all think that they're working for the same thing? They're working to deliver. Right? And do it well.
Focus on the mission and the end member, the end customer. So, all right, well, Michael, thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you.
Okay.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Bye.
You know, I forgot to mention to Michael when we were talking about speed and agility that I used to race greyhounds, but they kept beating me, so I had to quit. Now that may not be good for American audiences. So take two. I used to race greyhounds, but the passengers complained, so I had to quit.